Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. And on behalf of Director McElroy, I do welcome you this morning. She extends her regrets that she's not able to join us this morning, but she does look forward to reading the minutes and reviewing the meeting as well, since we are live streaming it. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Alex, who will start us off with roll call this morning.
Thank you, Tessie, and good morning, everyone. So everyone is aware I am having some computer troubles, so I'm actually joining this meeting through my work cell phone. So if there are any technical glitches, that is why. So everyone, please bear with me. As I have before, I'll begin with task force leadership and then proceed reading the names of the governor's appointees in alphabetical order by last name, proceed through our legislative appointments, and then finally representatives from our executive agencies who are part of this task force as well. Chair McElroy is excused. Vice Chair Dieferheimer?
I'm present.
Thank you. Addison?
Present.
Beach?
Present.
Blau? Boland?
Present.
Brockman?
Here.
Barode?
Present.
Berman?
Present.
Drost?
Present.
Hockwalt?
Present.
Johnson? Pakunka?
Here.
Mahajan? Reese?
Present.
Russell? Schiffel? Smith? Stevic Rust?
Present.
Thompson?
Here.
Van Runkle?
Here.
I'll again call the name Blau. Johnson? Mahajan? Russell? Schiffel? Smith? And I'll call the names of our legislative appointments, beginning with Leader Yuko. Senator Wilson?
He is unable to be here today, but I am here in his stead.
Thank you for letting us know. Representative Creech?
Here.
Representative House?
Here.
I'll again call the name Leader Yuko. Finally, I'll call the names of the representatives from our executive agencies. Director Corcoran? Director Ashenhurst?
I'm here.
Ombudsman Lawbert?
Here.
I'll again call the name Director Corcoran. Thank you, everyone. We do have a quorum. I'll now ask that we review the minutes from the previous meeting.
Alex, I found a couple typos. Who should I send those to?
You're welcome to send them to me, Bev.
Okay.
Thanks, Bev.
Substantial or just minor fixes?
Well,
Okay,
the
that's fine. It doesn't
director's
change,
name was
the meaning, right?
the director's name was misspelled in one, and then just misplaced possessive somewhere else.
No problem. Okay. Were there any substantial changes that anybody would like to recommend before approving the minutes?
I would say that in the director's discussion, the bullet points under her, actually, the Department of Health will have more ability to intervene. That's in licensed homes in Ohio. That's not just in nursing facilities. And I think there was one other place where It was just referenced. Well, I can't find it now. I noted that one, but yeah.
Okay, so look for items that name just nursing homes and amend to licensed homes.
Right. It's not always the same, but in some areas, yes, they're treated as licensed homes, which quite frankly might certainly, I think, expands even beyond assisted living.
Very good. Does anyone else have any changes that they would like to see on those minutes? Okay, very good. Then may we please have a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved, Bev Lubbert.
And a second, please.
A second, Catherine Brode.
Very good. Thank you so much. All in favor?
Aye.
Very good. Thank you so much. We'll make those amendments and then redistribute minutes. So at this time, this is certainly going to be a busy week for our task force. We do have morning and afternoon sessions of public forum coming up on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. While it would be wonderful if task force members could attend every one of those forums, we understand that's not realistic. So those forums are going to be recorded. You will have access to links of those recordings. Sage Squirrel is also putting together an agenda of who is speaking when on which topic. And so if there's something particular that you were unable to attend during the live forum and you wish to go back and look at that, those that will be available to you on demand in case you're not available to attend any of those forums. And just a reminder, those forums are not official task force meetings. Rather, we are treating these as information gathering sessions. So we're not going to be doing any roll calls. Again, I remind you, no deliberations during those public forums. And then we will have another task force meeting, and it's scheduled for July 23rd at this time. I'll work with the consultants and let you know if that does change. But as of right now, July 23rd at 10 a.m., or I'm sorry, July 26th at 10 a.m. is our next task force meeting, really? And that will be in person in Columbus, Monday, the 26th of July. I think those are all my notes for this morning. So at this time, I do turn it over to Yonda and team.
Thanks, Tessie. Good morning, everyone. This is Leanne. I see Catherine's hand. Catherine, did you have a question?
Maybe I missed it, but could you describe how the word has gotten out about those forums and how people have signed up to participate?
So in addition to, task force members being welcome to share those links and sign up ability for the forums, we have publicized them through the Department of Aging website. We have each item listed as an event. We do have a subscription list of individuals that have signed up to receive alerts from the Department of Aging. We have also distributed them to stakeholder lists to not only have those individuals sign up, but also share with others that might be interested.
Thanks, Tessie. Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. And we will... Bonnie, I thought you were holding something up to demonstrate your weekend. I thought there was something really exciting there. Like, look what I did this weekend. That's great. All right. So our plan for this morning is to review quickly the requested edits and suggestions that the task force made last week to the observations and conclusions slides. So we may have captured, we certainly tried to capture all of the changes that we heard. Some of those may be showing up in the minutes versus on the slides. That may be a matter of who took the notes and whether they were in my notes or Jill's notes, Jill and Christy's notes. So, but we would like your feedback on those particular edits and changes. And if you are looking at the deck that was sent, either a hard copy or online, the specific pieces that were updated, the specific text that was updated is highlighted in yellow, and it's on slides 6 and 7. And slide 7 actually is all new information. So the whole title is highlighted there. So we'd like to do that. We'd like to have a conversation then about, given sort of what you've heard over the past, this is our 4th task meeting since Sage Squirrel joined the group. And you obviously had a couple of task force and committee meetings prior to our being here. So we'd like to ask the question, given everything that you've learned and heard, what are your particular top 3, 4, 5, 3 to 5 observations and conclusions? And then the other question is there anything that hasn't really bubbled to the surface that you've kind of been waiting to hear about that hasn't yet come up? And we'd like to at least capture that, knowing as we think forward about what data we have, and also as we think forward about recommendations. We want to make sure that we aren't missing anything that really matters to the task force. And then the other piece, we probably will do very quickly. We will not go through all of the slides that are here. This was really information for all of you. We've had a few kind of snippets of conversations about really the importance of language and terminology. Some of you know my background in person-centered practices and know that very literally I have been a student of this since probably the late 1980s. And it's something that is very personal and really matters to me tremendously. So I really would like us to do our best to get it right, if you will, recognizing that it also varies both from person to person in terms of the way people who live with dementia or are impacted by dementia wish to be referred to when it's necessary to capture that. There are some journalistic and academic guidelines that we will follow. Those are also ever changing. And I'll give you a quick example of that. If you're interested, I will share this article. This past weekend, I read probably one of the best articles I've ever read on the topic of identity first language for people who are diagnosed with autism, and where we've spent 30 years talking about people first language. Many people, particularly younger folks who have an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis, use identity first language and wish to be referred to as an autistic. It's part of who they are. It's not seen as a clinical diagnosis. It's a really interesting topic. More and more, we're seeing that from younger people who live with that diagnosis. So I'll share that article if you're interested. That's purely information for you if you'd like it. So we shared some terminology resources for you, or with you, if you're interested in those. The piece that really matters to us is that we get the language right in the reports. So we've captured a little bit of the recommended language that we've heard so far: people living with dementia, people impacted by dementia, families impacted by dementia, informal caregivers, formal caregivers. So we just want to spend a couple of minutes on that and see if there's anything else that you've heard that you want to make sure we capture here. All right. So, Jean, I see your hand. Go ahead.
And I'm once again not sure I'm commenting at the right part right now, but on the slide that shows the yellowed observations to date, needs and challenges, I wanted to, while I agree with what is there, inconsistency and inadequacies in reimbursement and rate structures between Medicare and Medicaid services, I think there has been a lot of discussion about the need for an increase in waiver services reimbursements if we are really to open that door up to significantly cognitively impaired persons. And, you know, to be honest, I'm talking about the assisted living waiver, but there are other waivers as well.
Thanks, Jean. I went ahead and just pulled that slide up. Can you all see that?
I mean, that exists, but the other is separate. That is just that differentiation between the reimbursement levels. The waivers don't receive any Medicare money.
Right. Thanks, Jean. Bonnie has her hand up.
And again, like Jean, this may be out of order, but I always need to know what listening ears to keep on. And that is, if the report is going to come to the department at a certain date, and then we're going to be meeting on the 26th, what is our role with the report? Is it a vote? Is it, do we get input? How does that work, just so we know?
Yolanda, do you want to share a little bit about the conversation we had with the director on Friday, since we talked about that?
I think that we have probably lacked real clarity on that question as well until I think we finally got it more dialed in on Friday after we got their legal counsel involved in the question. And so the task force will need to vote. And so our plan is that we will need to we've got to get drafting on findings, and that's why this is such an important meeting and helping sort of dial in that language, because we've really got to get to getting that report drafted and the findings drafted. Our plan is that hopefully by the week of the 26th, when we have the in-person meeting, we will be able to present you with the list of findings that will be included in the report for the group's vote. And then the report itself will circulate through the approval process that's necessary in the administration as well. So it won't be a vote on the full report because of the fact that it will still be sort of in circulation, but it will be a vote on the findings as we write them up in the report. Leanne, does that sound accurate to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And I think I see Pete's hand and Doug's hand.
Yes, excuse me. Mine was going back to where you started, which was language. Just to mention long-term services and supports as being kind of an overarching term to use for the formal supports, as distinguished from informal. And then I think and there might be some disagreement on this, but I think we usually use the term long-term care, or long-term care usually refers to a facility. So the facility-based long-term services and supports, oftentimes, if you're trying to say it broadly, are oftentimes referred to as long-term care facilities. Although there are also some in the profession who would say, well, a long-term care facility is a skilled nursing facility and not assisted living. But I think the better usage is to include assisted living, and even, I know it's not part of our purview, but even like ICF, IID facilities as being part of quote unquote long-term care facilities.
I can tell you from ACL's perspective, certainly services provided in an ICF for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities do come under the LTSS umbrella. I think folks that work in IDD services might challenge us on whether they are considered long-term care, because they tend to distinguish that as services for older adults, but they certainly come under LTSS. A quick question, if I can, for whomever might know this best. I do see Jean's hand and Doug's hand as well. I just lost my train of thoughts. LTSS, again, I'm just thinking about this kind of with a federal eyes on for a second. LTSS would actually include informal and informal supports. So we think about supports being under supports, we would think formal or language that people don't love, actually, that sort of notion of natural supports, your community supports that are not paid. So typically families, friends, neighbors, volunteers. So I heard that a little bit differently from what you just said, Pete. So I just want to clarify, do you want us to separate, do you want us to think about LTSS as all of the formal, ergo kind of paid, funded supports and services, and then separate from that informal?
That's what I was thinking, but I guess if your view of the common usage is that long-term services and supports includes both formal and informal, then we'll just have to distinguish by using that one of those words in front of it, depending on which one we're talking about.
Okay, and I'll go back to sort of Bonnie's question about how do you all weigh in when you see the report? Please weigh in on if it's not clear. Some of that is maybe starting to split hairs, and again, it sometimes is very much about the provider or the person deciding how best to use that language, but. We do want to make sure I think for me, the thing I hear very clearly there is we want to make sure we are distinguishing between formal and informal. And that sounds, we want to make sure we capture that. So I think Doug's hand was up and then Jean's hand and then Bev.
First, with respect to long-term supports and services, I check and see how the department is defining OBLTSS, which is a lot of the intake, and it's my impression that it's both formal and informal. I'm often wrong, but never in doubt. But we may want to go ahead and look at that. The other question I have is, so I was looking at the SAMHSA, which the department put out. Are we going to have a lot of statistics and then what we'd come up with in this group as more of a formal discussion, or is it going to be mostly what's coming out of this group?
So go ahead, Yonda.
It's actually intended to be a synthesis of both.
Okay.
This group is absolutely driving the discussion, and that's a big part of why the language choices here are important. It's important to make sure that we are capturing particularly the high level findings, but our goal is to then meld that with the data and other information. So it may be that there is data, and I am saying this somewhat speculatively because I haven't gone back into our data yet to see if there is data that conflicts with discussion that has come out of this group. We'll find a way to discuss that. But the intent is that this group, that you are driving those high level findings.
Well, I am a frustrated academic, so if we can ever get to some of that, that'd be great.
Yeah. And we know, there will be findings that will be something along the lines of, this topic was discussed extensively, but there's inadequate data to support that. And the recommendation may be to go forward with a data collection methodology to establish a baseline and start to monitor that, whatever that might be. So.
Thanks, Shonda. Doug, a quick question. You mentioned SAMHSA as well. If it's on the ODA website, I can check there, but I didn't know what you were referencing. I know what SAMHSA is, but I don't know what about SAMHSA.
Sure I have the right acronym, but the Ohio Department of Aging last year at this time, may have been earlier, when it had a contract with a group that had essentially put together a strategic plan. And many of the people on this call, I think Pete, Catherine, and several other people, Jean, several other people on this call were in that group.
Yeah, it's the SAPA.
It's SAPA. Okay, great. We have SAPA. Yeah.
It's a good read.
Yep. Thank you. All right. I think Jean's hand is up, and I saw Diane's. And actually, Jean, and then Bev, and then Diane, and then Trey.
Thank you. I don't know that I certainly agree with Pete that there's a difference between in facility care and care at home. But I would say that in terms of the general public, and even in terms of a discussion of the minutes, that if you say long-term care, many assisted living persons, individuals, don't perceive themselves as in long-term care. I think there is still a lot of general perception by the public that long-term care means a nursing facility. And they don't see that assisted living necessarily as a medical placement. They see it as a life placement because because of age or infirmity, there are lots of daily living tasks they need assistance with. So I'm not sure that I'm in complete concert with Pete on that topic. I think they, while certainly assisted living and nursing homes share a lot, they're not the same.
It's kind of humorous, though, Jean, because the length of stay in assisted livings is typically much longer. So as far as long term, you could even say that in skilled nursing, there's a large portion of the population it's really not long term. But I was just going with kind of a generalized use of the words.
So I think what that really tells us. Thank you for that commentary, Jean. I mean, that really does highlight the importance of us defining the terms that we use in the report. And I see the notes there from Bev. Thank you. So Bev had her hand up, and then Diane and Trey.
I was just, there is a definition of long-term care facility in the Ohio Revised Code. It was originally put in there for the Ombudsman Office, but it has been used in other parts of Ohio law and rules. So that would be a good reference for you. It does include residential care facilities. And in my experience in Ohio, long-term services and supports has evolved as a term for the formalized system, not including informal caregivers.
Great, thank you. Diane, and then Trey.
Thanks. This is Diane. Two quick things. Well, maybe one not so quick, but I realized that there was something like care partner for informal caregivers. And when you say something is informal, I worry that it denigrates it, that it demeans it, that the public perception may be that when someone is being cared for at home, we're not looking at that as important as someone who is being cared for in some sort of institution. So I throw that out there simply because that's a concern of mine. The other thing, actually, that I wanted to ask for clarification on, and I was not able to attend the last meeting, but going back to the minutes once again, I just want some clarification on the next round of public forums that are supposed to be coming in August and September. And so I understand now on July 26th, we're supposed to be voting on findings that will be included in the report. This report, I'm assuming, is still being slated for submission to the legislature in August. Is that correct?
That is correct. The due date to the legislature is August 5th.
Right. That's what I thought. So then the public forums in August or September and with the final report in November, was that originally planned, or is that something that was added on to further expose, give us a little more time to delve into the findings? I just want to make sure I'm clear on this.
No, that is exactly what was intended. Certainly, as we came on board in late May and started coming alongside ODA and seeing where things were and what the expectation was in the legislation, there was recognition that it would be very, very challenging, if not impossible, to do a really high-level task force report that contained findings and robust recommendations for specific issues of Ohio and what the picture is in Ohio. So we worked with ODA leadership as well as the legislative sponsors to break that report up into two components, with this first report being really preliminary findings, findings to date, and the second report being much more robust, probably some enhancement of the findings, as well as development of recommendations that come out of those final findings. And that, one of the pieces that was problematic in doing a high quality report, complete report by August 5th, was our inability to get robust public comment. And so we have the public forums this week that are intended primarily for professionals to make sure we get that contribution. But the longer timeline allows us to expand opportunities for public comment, really focusing not just on the provider and professional communities, but the members of the public who are, living with, diagnosed with, impacted by Alzheimer's or other dementias. So that's why there will be further public comment in support of that final report.
Great, thank you, Yonda. I appreciate the information and the laying this out a little bit better. Can you tell me, is there a due date for that November final report at this point that we're aiming towards?
It is supposed to be due 90 days after the first report that is due August 5th. So it puts it in the vicinity. I don't have a calendar to count with here, but it puts it in the vicinity of November 5th.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Trey, I see your hand.
Yeah, I think, thank you. I think one of the things that just in reading through the minutes from the last meeting, as well as previous meetings, we touched on was really around acute care, mainly at the hospital level. And one thing that I would say in Ohio, and it's kind of going back to the previous meeting, is as a recommendation or something we should be looking at, is looking at Alzheimer's and dementia acute care, sort of almost like the creation of an advisory committee or something to truly address specific areas around quality of care, strategies to improve cost efficiencies and effectiveness, as well as just overall operational planning at the hospital level. That's something that, it's come up a couple of times. I was on a call recently internally around just quality assurance and performance improvement at the hospital level around individuals living with dementia that the hospitals are seeing. But really focusing on that as an area of opportunity as a state may make a lot of sense, simply because we see a lot of folks who have dementia entering into these healthcare settings, and it can go either way sometimes, because sometimes hospitals are not prepared. Obviously, with COVID, that kind of highlighted that throughout the process, and it's something that's come up a couple times in different states. So just wanted to put that on our radar as we look at these specific issues. And I know hospitals came up last time, so I wanted to bring that to our attention.
Thanks, Trey.
Yep.
I see Doug and then Pete.
Yeah, as the champion of home community-based services, I think, in this group, I don't want everybody to think that we need to think about assisted living facilities, nursing homes, hospitals as the only place where these folks are being taken care of. We know, just in my little work group, the majority of the people had some experience with a parent or a friend or a neighbor that had Alzheimer's disease, that somebody was trying to take care of them at home. And the fact that if we look at utilization rates, the home community-based service utilization rate right now is higher than utilization rates in nursing homes specifically. I'm not sure if it's higher in nursing homes and assisted living facilities combined, but I don't think that we can miss out on that distinction.
Thanks, Doug. Pete.
I was just going to add on to what, excuse me, what Trey was saying a moment ago relative to the acute care system, and I think that the focus of a lot of our discussion last week it was last week, whenever we had this conversation, was around acute care being a place where, or a site where there's identification. It may be the first place where there's identification of someone who has dementia or may need additional services, and that acute care is typically focused on the acute problem and not on other aspects of the person's overall condition. So that, and I think that's where it kind of came in, that we need to acknowledge that, and I guess in the next phase, see if there's some recommendations around that.
Thanks, Pete. Jean, is your hand up from before, or do you have a comment? Jean, you might be muted.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on to that process that Pete mentioned. I think when we talk about disseminating this potentially one-stop shop information, that it would be really important to make discharge planners at the hospital aware of that, because Pete's absolutely right. I mean, they take care of an acute issue, but that issue may be different if they have the individual has some significant dementia, even in terms of going home, if they don't have any support at home, etc. So I think it's very important that information on a one-stop shop be disseminated to hospital discharge planners to provide as a resource to the individual and families, and to just know about themselves.
Thanks, Jean. Yeah, I remember Doug brought up last week the ADRC network as a consideration. So thank you for that. Anybody else's hand? Okay. Let me just ask really quickly. There are a few folks that have not had a chance to or have not yet weighed in. Let me just see if there's anybody else that would like to contribute that we haven't heard from. I haven't heard from Representative House, Representative Creech, I think Lori, Joe, I think joined after roll call. Welcome, Joe. Pam, Tina, I'm kind of going through the list here. Dr. Drost, Lisa, Sally, Catherine, anybody else that we haven't heard from that would like to add to the comments right now? And not that you can only comment if I called your name.
I'll go ahead. This is Lori. One of the things that was on my list from last week also is, again, I think in line with what we're talking about on the acute care side. Yeah. Thinking about it, I love the idea of discharge planners having the information to send people home. It seems, again, we front load very well sometimes on your side with diagnostics. And I don't have anything to add. We fall short somewhere in the middle of that process of somebody who has comorbid dementia but happens to be in an intensive care unit or a cardiac unit. It's almost as if the dementia is kind of secondary and they move that aside, and yet the quality of that process, the quality of the process of their care needs to be seen through the lens of their cognitive difficulties as well. And I think we tend to bifurcate that a lot on the inpatient side, and that tends to be a big struggle. So, sometimes we'll see clinicians saying the person is refusing without acknowledgement that the person lacks the capacity to refuse. And so it influences our whole focus of care. So I think making sure that we're taking care of, again, oftentimes people are not really diagnosed in the hospital. They come in with the diagnosis from their primary care doctors, and hospitals then see it kind of as just part of the list of diagnostics and not see it as important as it really is. So I think that's really important. And then the other thing I mentioned last week, I'll just highlight again, is because we're not doing such a great job with that, we're not, I think we still struggle with the transition of care. So somebody goes from the ED to the intensive care units to the floor to post-acute to home. Every place of transition of care is a place where our vulnerable seniors get lost in the shuffle, and our most vulnerable are the people who have multiple medical issues and carry a diagnosis of dementia. So I think making sure that we pay close attention to that acute care side, but also the transitioning of care on the operational side is really important. And then I think the other comment I was just going to add is really now thinking more about the post-acute care world in terms of staffing. We know that we're struggling with staffing. It's a huge issue. But I think we've talked a couple of times here with the task force about not only elevating training, elevating the status, really looking that it still continues to surprise me that we allow people, our aides, and sometimes even some of our clinical staff, to provide care to our most vulnerable seniors, and we pay them less than McDonald's, and we train them less than any other part in the hospital settings and in the post-acute care world. So I think, again, if we elevate, highlight the importance of the work that they do, we're screening better, we're training better. I think that is, we could do a million other things, but if we don't address that issue, the people at the bedside providing that care, we've done a great disservice to our seniors who are vulnerable. And then the final piece that I would just add in is, we've touched on this before, and I know all of these are pretty lofty goals for a task force and to think that we're going to accomplish all of this, but I think the driving issue is a huge safety issue for the public. It continues to be the place where we dabble, is what I would say. They come in for driving evaluations. We put them through a simulator. We talk about to families like, you really should take their keys, and then we say goodbye. And many of our seniors will pass. They have the capacity to go from point A to point B, but they lack the judgment. They lack reasoning skills, all of the other things that makes a more comprehensive driving assessment. And then we don't do good on the follow-through end. We send families home and we go, well, good luck, take those keys, you got to do it. And I don't think we've closed the loop on that from how as a state we can support that. And I know we talked a little bit about the DMV and that process, but it feels still a little weak to me, like we need to at least still put some teeth behind that whole process, because I think driving is one of our biggest issues of fatalities that absolutely do not need to be occurring for people who are the innocent victims of our seniors who are behind the wheel and should not be. So that's my 3 cents.
Thank you, Lori. Okay, thank you all. I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is Jen. I was going to kind of piggyback on the acute care side for a couple of things. One, I think that it is something that we don't appreciate is, not only the dementia itself, dementia-related behaviors, but the caregiving stress and concerns that arise out of that or related to that drive acute hospitalizations as well. So that kind of circles back into the need of I think, education and support, certainly for our caregivers or care partners, because I do see clinically that does drive, they're not reaching out to primary care, or they're not reaching out to other supports, or taking people to the emergency room because of that lack of support or lack of perceived support, not knowing where those resources are. So that kind of ties those pieces together a little bit. And then I think we exhausted the registry type of thought process with our last discussion, but I do think that this is another place to tie that in. How many people come to the hospital because of a concern that they had maybe even, but that we don't acknowledge that they have either decision-making capacity concerns, or that there are other people who could help to support this individual if they knew that they were in the hospital even, right? 2, 3, 4 days go on, and it's discharge planning, and kind of picking on back on what Lori was saying. And then we have a situation where, they can't go home safely. We don't know who their care partners are. We don't know who their surrogates are to help them in this process, where a registry of sorts may help to have that information in a single location for many individuals. Those were 2 thoughts to tie pieces together.
Thank you. Let me I do see Pam and Greg have their hands up. So 2 thoughts here. One is I want to ask you if your next comments are connected to the editing or updating of observations to date, or will it sort of fall into top 3 to 5, most important conclusions and observations for you. If it's the latter, I'm going to go ahead and move us on, but let me just check in with Pam and Greg really quickly.
Hi. Yes, hi. So just wanted to briefly reiterate that when the caregiver takes mom or dad to the hospital with pneumonia, a fall with a fracture, CHF, whatever that may be, and then they are referred to the skilled nursing, that diagnosis of Alzheimer's it falls to the wayside and it becomes a comorbidity. And upon admission to the skilled nursing, they're looking more at the rehabilitation of the fracture or the treatment, care, and services of the pneumonias. And if somehow the discharge planners can talk more with the caregiver about the expectation and how this affects their diagnosis of Alzheimer's, which when you have a debilitating acute condition, that's going to exacerbate the symptoms of Alzheimer's. And then once they reach the skilled nursing, they're not always looking at that part of it or communicating with the caregiver in regards to, yeah, we're going to rehabilitate mom or dad with their fracture or give IVs or whatever that may be. And there's very little, if nothing, said about what we're doing to ensure that their quality of life and their quality needs for the diagnosis of Alzheimer's is also playing into that. And so that was just my 2 cents into this. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. And Trey, I see the piece that you copied into the chat, but was there something else that you would like to add?
No, I just think it was helpful. I just dug it up. I mean, it's helpful to kind of go to what we're talking about and just, highlight another state that's done something similar, mainly around operational planning and really, the care coordination of that. So I just wanted to put it in the chat just so folks can look at it or research it on their own. Cool.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Last chance here. Let me just ask really quickly, would anybody else like to add commentary, updates, edits to the observations and conclusions, changes updates that we made between last week and today? Great. Okay. Thank you all so much for those comments and those updates and that additional information. We'd like to spend some time now on this question, sort of given everything you've heard, and there's no way to get all of that onto one slide, obviously. So we are relying a bit on memory. But what would you say are your top 3 to 5 observations? And the second part of that is there anything that we've not captured here that hasn't surfaced that you want to make sure shows up? Some of that may have just come up now as well. So feel free to let us know if you've already shared that information. Thinking about time, we only go until 11 today. Today is a 2-hour meeting. So it's 10 minutes of 10. I'm going to see whether we can maybe go through this in the next 40 minutes, change our agenda in terms of timing a bit. I think we can probably do that. Leanne,
can you please clarify, is this top 1 to 3 or 3 to 5, even if somebody else has already said that item? So do you want people to say, oh, well, they said mine, so I'm going to say different ones? Or do you really want people to prioritize as if this will be used for ranking purposes?
I wasn't thinking about it as ranking, my top 1 and then the second and the third. It's really sort of, what are your for you and the work that you do, what's most important. I do think that it is valuable to capture if the same topic comes up multiple times. So if you are sharing something and you've heard 3 other people say it, please comment on that. So that I think for our note keeping and report writing, we should be saying, this surfaced as one of the top issues. So, thank you. Great question. Thanks, Christy. And Greg, if I can, I'm going to start with you because I realized that you had your hand up and I forgot to call on you. I apologize. And so I'm going to start with you, if I may.
Yeah, that's okay. I had put my hand down just because I could respond now. So a couple things that I would really like to hit on is, first of all, I love the idea of Trey sharing on the chat about Massachusetts and sort of finding a mentor state of somebody or a state that's doing it well and, you know, not reinventing the wheel. I think the application of what we come up with is going to be difficult. It's daunting. And I think to have sort of a mentor state that can help us through sort of the challenges of whatever we come up with and bringing that to fruition is super important. And then obviously as a private operator, I love public policy, but only to a certain degree. We don't want to put policy that is constraining. We want to put policy that helps us be better caretakers of whatever we're doing in assisted or skilled or what have you. So I just want to be conscious as to how we put policy in place that it doesn't constrain innovation and creativity. And then for me, it's what Lori had mentioned about the wages that we pay our frontline caregivers. I agree, it's an insult, but it's an industry problem, mainly because of the way that we've sort of built the industry, that bigger is not better. The difficulty is when we start answering to Wall Street or a board of directors or a REIT, we're not answering to the right people, and that's our families and our residents. And it's easy to get caught up in making global decisions that aren't beneficial for the end user and the care team members and stuff like that. So I think that that's going to be a very difficult challenge for us to sort of raise the bar on you know what benefits we provide, what pay rates we provide for people on the front line, especially in communities like ours. But I really think it's the way that the industry is built that's more of a challenge. So I don't know if we can make impact there. I know we pay a lot of attention to that. I mean, really who we need to compete with is not other senior living communities. It's the Amazons of the world. It's the McDonald's of the world. It's the Starbucks of the world. And what are they providing? The same level of employee that we need to provide. And so we're trying to equal that and compete with not our senior living sisters and brothers, but really the industry at large or beyond senior living. And so I think that's going to be just a really tough thing for us to do something about. I think it's a shift that we need to see industry-wide and not something that we can do as a task force. I just wanted to put that out there. I don't know where that leads, but and that's really, you know, obviously the funding thing, the waiver, those types of things are super important. That we're doing the right thing, that we're putting the money in the right place, getting the message out. Once we do build a platform that provides and leads people through the journey of dementia, educating the state of Ohio as to what's the first step they take when there is an issue, I think is important. Outside of that, you know, that's about all I have to share.
Thank you, Greg. All right, so I'm going to go to Representative House and then Director Ashenhurst and Lisa. Representative House?
I don't have anything at the moment. I can't see the thing because my phone is acting crazy, but I will follow back up later today to give my commentary.
Okay, thank you so much. Director Ashenhurst.
Thank you. You know, I look at things with such a different lens in that I only run state-run hospitals or state-run veterans homes So it's a whole different perspective. But I tell you, one of the huge things for me is wages and the competitiveness with other facilities nearby and trying to bring people on. So the wage issue is huge for me. The taking away keys and all that. Once we have the resident or the veteran in our care, we have a lot more ability to work with families and work with folks who don't necessarily know how to get benefits and all that. So training and wages are really big in my world.
Thank you. Lisa, and then Tina and Joe. Lisa.
Yeah, so I think, if I'm going through the three most important issues, I think it starts with, of course, like we've talked about, early diagnosis, and then that sort of segues into the number two of community education and the resources that are available to these people living with and taking care of someone with these diseases. And then again, transitions into continuity of care and overarching industry standards, and really making sure we're all speaking the same language and walking people through it in the same way, so they're not getting misinformation from one place and then having to adjust their whole what they thought was their plan based on the inaccurate information or limited information that they got in the beginning. I think one of the things that we haven't really touched on, Jean was talking about the difference between lifestyle assistants and nursing assistants. And while these diseases can last for a huge span and they start, at the very early phases, it looks very different than the end stages, right? And so what some research that I really have never been able to come across is the amount of people who require nursing level care by some point in their disease process. And so really making sure that people are aware of that and that they're prepared for what that might look like. Because I think they sometimes go into situations thinking that mom's going to be, confused and forgetting things and not really grasping the fact that at the end stages, it is possible that she's requiring total care, and that not all providers can assist with those levels. That's it for me.
Thank you. Tina, and then Joe, and then we'll go to Representative Creech. Tina?
Hi. Education is probably one of the ones that's really important to me. I think if we could develop easier access to resources or even adapting those resources for better understanding or better carryover and styles of learning, I think that's huge. And really getting that education out to medical drivers or cashiers, loved ones, caregivers, or, just any businesses out there so that we can really improve that education and understanding. Early detection and early intervention is really important too. I just think that we can really, get our loved ones and promote a good quality of life if we can get in there earlier and get those interventions in earlier too. And then I do believe that the driving really needs to be addressed as well.
Thank you very much. Joe Russell, and then Representative Creech.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I think it's been all very well said. I love the fact that we are definitely putting a focus on the community and understanding that for most people, where their care is going to begin and where the resources that they need is going to start in the community. And for a lot of people, they want to stay in the community for as long as possible. So just really appreciate the contributions people are making. And I really like the additions that have been made. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So we'll go to Representative Creech and then Catherine and then Pete. Representative Creech.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add either, but I do think, the recurring theme that we've been hearing over time is workforce and pay and all those things, which we're seeing in every industry. But the thing that I've liked this morning that I heard the most is not reinvent the wheel. I don't know what other states are doing or what other people are doing across the states, but can we piggyback off of some, start in the middle instead of starting at the beginning? And maybe we're already doing that. that's the point that I picked up that I like the most so far.
Thank you. Catherine and Pete, and then Sally. Catherine.
Yeah, I wanted to just take Greg's comment just a little bit further about not constraining creativity in the creation of our policies. And I loved the conversation that we had on balancing dignity with risk, and the policies that allow non-secure units, and really allowing us to innovate in terms of how we serve both within the informal or our homes as well as within our more institutional care. I really hope we can emphasize that a lot. And then obviously staffing and funding and early detection. 2 other points I'd make on the educating the greater community. In our last discussion, we emphasized the importance of engaging the community in that discussion. So age-friendly communities and dementia-inclusive communities that are informed by the community, not by external, structures that we may think are good. And then finally, this may go beyond the Alzheimer's and Dementia Task Force, but one of our members, and again, we represent not-for-profits who've been in the community a long time, created a program that was called When You No Longer Drive. Not if you no longer drive, but when you no longer drive. And it was focused on the entire community. Every single one of us needs to understand that one day we should plan on not driving when we no longer drive, and to begin to inform the public, all of us, to consider that decision rather than having this be coming at you out of nowhere because you have a symptom or a concern. So just throw that out there as an idea. I'd love to see that on billboards around Ohio. Planning for when you no longer drive. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much. Being married to somebody who worked in the public transit, paratransit industry for many, many years, that resonates a lot with me. Thank you. We'll go to Pete, and then Sally, and then Doug. Pete?
Excuse me, reiterating a lot of things that people have already said. Workforce is at the top of the list, and wages are at the top of the list of things that are important in developing workforce or trying to recover workforce. I think we have to, there's been comments about educating members of the public or people who are family members of individuals that have dementia, or the individuals themselves about where they can find help, where they can find resources. That really has to be something that is very visible and really penetrates, because I think we've talked about how a lot of those resources are there. I know Doug mentioned the Aging and Disability Resource Network, which is essentially the AAAs, but that doesn't mean people know that, and that's I think that's and that may not be the only place or the only entry because if they're not that far along the journey, maybe that's not where they really would need to go. But getting that information, figuring out how to get that information out so people can easily find it, and then all of this discussion about early detection and early intervention. I think that's really an interesting question, and it's one that we really should have findings about, and then ultimately try to work on solutions. Because to Catherine's point about the dignity issue, and then also hers and others' points about driving, these are hard things. And okay, let's say the hospitals are now way better at following up when they have someone who's there because they had a hip fracture, but they also have dementia, and in doing something to connect that person to services or to resources that deal with their dementia and not just to their hip fracture. Let's say that happens. But then what does that look like? You know, when we talk about driving, you know, and to your point, Leanne, you know, it really implies, okay, if we're going to take away somebody's keys, or if we get them to voluntarily say, I'm not going to drive anymore, which some people do, it's wonderful when they do, then where does that leave them? What is their, what are the resources for them to get to where they need to go now that they're no longer able to drive? Because the default might well be, okay, well, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to drive. I got to get my McDonald's coffee this morning to my mother. She had to have her McDonald's coffee every morning. So I think that's, you know, yes, early detection and early intervention. I mean, if you want to call it that, but that means so many different things to different people based on where they are in the journey and their you know, their particular circumstances. So I think we really have to give a lot of thought to how that could work.
Thank you. Thanks, Pete. We go to Sally, and then Doug, and then Bonnie.
Okay. So I'll try and be brief. I agree with the points that were made earlier about the discussion around dignity and risk. I think that's an area
information about Camelot
that you know, we need to focus on. I also think if we could build upon some of the work with
Sally, just a moment. Can I just ask folks to mute their line if they're not speaking? Thank you. Thanks, Sally. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, it's okay. It's okay. The building upon the work with age-friendly and dementia-friendly communities, it seems to me if those were into thread into a lot of communities, some of these other issues potentially could be addressed right under the work that's being done through those efforts. Excuse me. I also think that if we could have policies be more nimble at the state level, that could make a big difference for providers as well as at the state level. Workforce issues are a huge issue that I think people are dealing with. And then the one comment about, let me just make sure I say this correctly, but the uneven distribution of resources across the state. I talk to people frequently. I live in an urban area, but we serve a lot of communities, and I really think that family caregivers really struggle in some circumstances just having access to services. And so I know, having a driving assessment center is great, except sometimes they're 2.5-3 hours away, and that's just not practical for families. Or getting to a geriatrician is great, but there's none for 2.5-3 hour drive. And, so how do you provide that continuum of care? So, and not that every community has to have the exact same thing, but I think access continues to be a huge issue across our communities. So those would be I had 5, a little bit more than 3, sorry.
Some of that I think was just about how to make sure everybody could contribute in our time. We could probably spend many more hours on top priorities. Thank you, Sally. Doug, and then Bonnie, and then Melissa.
On the driving thing, I can remember going to my great-grandmother's house and Dad and great-grandma being in a pretty heated discussion about the cops taking her car away. And finally, at the end of the discussion, he said, "But Grandma, you ran into a school bus." Can you imagine how badly we all would have felt if somebody had gotten hurt? Now, I will tell you, at one time there was a program out there called Drive Able, which helped people identify. As it turns out, some of the materials were cooked. But the point is that we need to get neurologists, we need to get doctors, we need to get OTs involved in this process, and maybe some help through people at the 211 level and at the Aging Disability Resource Network level to make the proper diagnosis. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it would be interesting if we could set up some sort of panel of interdisciplinary professions that would go ahead and help us with best practice. I don't know if that's possible, but I do know that at least in what we do for the passport clients and our Medicaid clients, we are supposed to put together an interdisciplinary team for each client. And then the last thing is this whole, brought it up, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. When I was in Florida, my AAA created the 211 system at United Way in Florida, in Orlando, and now it's expanded across the whole state. It would be nice to see a little bit more collaboration between 211 and the ADRNs to make better outreach to all people who may start with that network and need some crossover between the two. That's it.
Thanks, Doug. Let me ask really quickly, Yonda and Christy and Jill, I'm on my end, I missed a word that Doug said. You said collaboration between 211 and I just want to make sure that the folks who are taking notes heard that, because I did not.
And the Aging Disability and Resource Network.
Great, thank you. Okay, there was a kind of a blip in the audio there.
We had funding from the federal government. We had philanthropic organizations involved, and we also had hospitals involved and counties involved. So it was a big approach, and it was very, very successful. I don't know where it is now.
Right. Thanks, Doug. And again, can I just ask folks to mute their line, please, if you're not speaking? Thank you. I've got some background noise. So Bonnie, and then Melissa, and then we'll go to Lori. Bonnie?
Thank you, Leanne. I have a couple of comments. The first is I'd like to build upon what Sally just talked about and Catherine with the dementia inclusive communities. We keep talking about it, but we're not making it, as best I can see, part of this report. And it is very hard for me to see how this report will have the relevance that it could if we stick to or stay with the discussions that we're having about the healthcare and long-term care system, and we don't focus also on this. And I understand that we've been talking about it tangentially, but I'd like to at least suggest that we move the conversation to saying, yeah, that's important, and it should be part of this report. We have 4 amazing efforts here in our state, and then there are many others in the state that some of us are not involved in. But why would we not be bold and change the frame? I know my voice is quivering because I know I'm not being terribly nice, but the sense that it's time to change the frame, and that's why we're doing this report. The next thing that I wanted to add was, again, building on Sally and Catherine, and I know I mentioned it a lot last time, the right to folly and focusing on the distinction between risk and safety. We still have not seen anything about the report that so many of us on this call did, and that was 470, that addressed all of this, or all of it. I can't say it was perfect, but it addressed a lot of this. And it's hard to understand how this report is going to get a different reception than that, because we never saw it. And even this group has not seen it again. So I want to bring that up. The third thing I wanted to bring up was that I completely agree, Leanne. Obviously, I am a student of person-centered care as well. But in my new position, what I have learned is that using the language of person-centered care sometimes makes you not be received because people don't understand what you're saying. And so I was one of the people who was so against using the term behaviors. But if you don't use it, people don't understand what you're talking about. And so we kind of went middle ground to calling them responsive behaviors. I didn't like myself for doing it, but I want to make sure that we make this report something that people will utilize as opposed to being totally academic. So with that, I will stop talking. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. I appreciate that. One of the things that we spend a lot of time in person-centered practices is the conversation around language can't sugarcoat, language can't gloss over real challenging issues. And so the challenge for us is how to communicate that in a way that doesn't dehumanize or is undignified for the person who experiences that challenge. Thank you. Melissa, and then Lori and Jean.
Thank you. Good morning. I only have two comments. The first things that are my number one priority for this report would be to have an action plan to communicate the resources to those recently diagnosed and their family members. I know that's been said already, but I would underscore that. We need to be able to communicate the resources available to those affected through a wide spectrum and different availabilities. The second priority for me with this report is to ensure that people who offend against our most vulnerable populations, including those with Alzheimer's and dementia care, can be held accountable. And while there are accountabilities in the law, I think that they can go further. And perhaps that also draws into some of the things that we talked about last week, ensuring that our first responders and law enforcement are equipped to interact with individuals with such diagnoses. And I won't go on forever about that because I think there are good trainings already in place for them, but to just repeat that and perhaps make other suggestions because that can implicate what we as prosecutors are able to do on the accountability side once we get into court.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm going to pause for just a moment. Catherine, I see your hand. Did you want to add to something that somebody said? It may have been up from before as well.
Yeah, I'll take it down.
Okay, thanks. Just checking. Thank you. Lori, and then Jean, and then Dr. Drost. Lori.
Yeah, I think I already hit on the three things in my last comment. So just highlighting again, driving the pull-through process with people who have comorbid dementia, both on the acute and the post-acute care side, and making sure that we're not losing our vulnerable seniors in that transition of care from different levels of care needs.
Thank you. Jean.
Thank you. Well, I agree with many of the very good comments that have been made. I guess for me right now, I think that education piece is very important, and that even includes that having that resource availability and capability along making people aware of it and then having it really available all along the spectrum to people, through physicians, through the hospital, through all those places. But then the sort of societal education that maybe kind of taking from Catherine's comment, that maybe rather than approaching driving just from a perspective of older people, which quite frankly they resent, or certainly people with cognitive conditions, what we need to do is re-educate the public on ageism. What we need to do, and combining, because we're going to have lots of that as people are living longer and longer, unless we have a cure, which God knows I know we would all love. But I think that's really important to that destigmatizing this, to making people willing to be identified, to be I think a lot of people don't go for early intervention because their philosophy is, I don't want to know. And I think that very broad, big education encompassing many of the items we've discussed. And then, of course, I have to say that the workforce is a huge issue. I would like to see the state become even more involved as it could in helping develop workforce, because that challenges absolutely every level along the care system. And then I agree about adequate wages, which adequate wages are going to either require, increased reimbursements, or quite frankly, since assisted living has lots of private pay, the willingness of people to pay more, which we kind of always assume, but that's not necessarily always the case. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean. One of the slides and some of the information that we shared, it's slide 10, shows some research that you're right, Jean, that says the stigma associated with diagnosis actually does affect people's willingness to seek treatment or diagnosis and treatment. Thank you for your comments. Dr. Drost, and then we'll go to Ombudsman Laubert and Pam. Dr. Drost.
Great, thank you. Echoing a lot that's been said about workforce development, and I would say not just in the training, but certainly in recruitment as well as retention. Education is a part of that, but we really need to be recruiting providers, certainly diagnosing providers if that early diagnosis is key to this. So neurologists, geriatricians, neuropsychiatrists, geropsychiatry, all of those people really serving on the front lines of providing that formal diagnosis, but also looking at dementia specialists if there are opportunities within primary care fields as well. But extending that into our nurses, therapists, personal care assistants, identifying people and really harnessing them, supporting them in maintaining that interest through their education and training. And then education not only of those folks coming on board, new healthcare providers, again, across that interprofessional team approach in that provider word. But then how are we looking at providing education to our current interprofessional kind of team of providers that is caring for these individuals? Along with that, maybe does come some discussion of wages. Not only certainly agree wholeheartedly with the personal care assistants, but nurses in nursing facilities or assisted living facilities often paid substantially differently than those who are looking at acute care settings. So kind of thinking thoughtfully about those things as well. One of the barriers, and really echoing the comments just said, are that risk of ageism across the board of people determining what specialty they're going to practice in, of people seeking out assistance for diagnoses and interventions, and how that plays a role. And then discussing my kind of third point is that really advanced care planning and looking at it more of just that do not resuscitate or living well or power of attorney, though all of those pieces are key, but really focusing on that person-centeredness. What are their goals? How do we help our treatments, our interventions, our team approach to their care to really help them continue to meet or to reach those goals over time? I think those are three key pieces for me.
Thank you. Ombudsman Laubert and then Pam.
Okay, so I put my hand up earlier, probably too late when we were talking about some of the wording. I would recommend on the need for increased community awareness. I think what we're really shooting for here is understanding. I think a lot of people would say that they're aware of dementia and what it might mean, and they might have the wrong awareness. So what I think we really want is understanding and engagement. And so that would be one of my priorities, that item. And then the increased need for informal caregiver support and policies, especially with regard to the nursing home, that caregiving does stop at the nursing home door. So support for family members of long-term care facility residents. And the training item, the workforce shortage item are my favorites. And then what I feel is missing here is I think what has been my mantra in every meeting is that we don't have standards for memory care. It means something different to everyone who hears the term.
That's right. Thank you. We have talked a lot about that in our internal meetings. Early on, I think what you said, and it really struck me, was people expect something different. Families expect something different when memory care is marketed as a service, as something being provided, and in many cases it's not something different, and that really, we hold on to that. Thank you, and I'm sorry that I missed your hand up earlier. I apologize.
That's okay, no problem.
Thank you. So it's Pam and then Trey.
Okay, thank you. I certainly agree with every single thing that's been talked about, and really, really value the importance of what Bev was just talking about with memory care being different, and memory care offering a higher level of understanding and care for those individuals with Alzheimer's, but also for their families as well. So for me, the most important is those family caregivers at home. And since so many of our individuals are still living at home, the families are initially going through a guessing game. Is this Alzheimer's? Is this a UTI? Is this just a moment? And as much preliminary education that can be given to children, sort of in anticipation of need of their aging parents, would be fabulous. Preparing them that this is a real possibility and giving them those tools early on to be thinking about. No one wants to think about, well, what am I going to do if mom or dad get Alzheimer's? And the chances that they will are high. And so teaching our potential caregivers in the future today, signs to look for, what do you do early on? How can you delay the process if that's possible? Is a huge need. The next thing is the availability and affordability of respite. I just know, as all of us have been in this position of a family caregiver, you need breaks, and it's very, very difficult to find affordable and real respite care that you can trust your loved one in the hands of someone else for 2, 1 day, 3 or 4 days. And so those are my bigger priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And I think Trey and then Diane are the last two. And if I've missed someone, I apologize, and we will keep going after Trey and Diane. Trey?
Yep. Basically, I think a lot of people covered everything. Sort of the big three I would have, obviously workforce as it related to training and compensation, early detection and diagnosis, really at the health systems level is a great opportunity. And I think I agree with Bonnie. I think looking at community resources and impact at the community level, I think that supports family caregivers and families in their community by providing resources and insight. And I hate to sneak in one more, but I agree with Bev in that memory care standards is huge. And I think states that get it right are doing better around this issue. But when there is no standard, people get confused. We've dealt with it at the association, and we're even somewhat confused because there's no standard. So I think that would be the 4. I'm sorry for squeaking in another one, but
3 to 5 was the range. You're good.
Okay.
You're good. You still got one more if you want it.
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Trey. Diane.
I kept changing my list as people talked about various things, and I'm sure that happened to just about everybody. I can't speak any more eloquently than everyone else. However, my short list would be focusing on communication and support to and for family care partners, as well as working on destigmatizing Alzheimer's and dementias, and making this, normalizing the activity, honestly, for families going forward. Anything that we can do to educate the young, educate ourselves, the adults, educate each of us who may eventually meet one of these diseases head on. does everything positive, and having as much communication and support out there as possible from the state and from society, our community in general, will do nothing but help us all.
Thanks, Diane. So let me check and see, did I miss anyone accidentally? Feel a bit like Santa Claus here, checking my list twice and 3 and 4 times. Okay, so let me just open it up for a few minutes. It's 10:32. I think we're okay time-wise. We've got 2 things to do before we finish. One is just a quick touch on the language, see if there's anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to add there. And Yonda has some notes on the wrap-up, though we actually talked about some of that in the beginning. That's more about the process for the report. But let me offer a few minutes of opportunity if there's anything else that folks want to add. Did your list change as you listen to other people speak? And do you want to add anything else? And Pam, I see your hand, but I wasn't sure if that was from before. And you might be on.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to have that up.
No apologies. Just want to check. Really? Nothing else to add. Impressive. Well done.
I need to raise my hand.
No, go ahead, Jean. You're fine.
I didn't mention, but I do think in some of, actually it was more in our capacity committee meetings, but I think we do need to truly support the, and I don't know what we're calling them now, informal seem to get some, not, family friend caregivers. I think they really do need to be supported given the enormous amount of care they are providing in terms of this issue. And one thing we discussed, and nobody brought it up on these things, and I think it's, although it is in the minutes, I believe, is that the importance of offering some kind of respite for family or informal or whatever we end up in the report calling them. And I think it's real important too that to me, respite has to be a little bit broader. I mean, it has to sometimes, I think, mean for families to continue this incredible amount of service they're providing their loved ones or friend or whatever, is that they actually maybe physically need a break, whether it's a funded respite for adult daycare, whether it's a funded respite for, and these are for the people that don't qualify for Medicaid, because we have to remember when we're talking about this, we're talking about a lot of population that doesn't access Medicaid funding as well, but maybe not have enough that the help of a short-term stay would be incredibly beneficial and would keep them actually providing that long-term service and support.
Right. It would still contribute to delaying institutionalization. Exactly. Thank you, Jean. Catherine, I think you're on mute. I can see you talking.
Yep. Thanks. I was going to hop in just before Jean spoke with a similar comment that a lot of us expressed the importance of staffing and wages, and I was one of them as one of my top priorities. But what we didn't discuss was a more recognition of the working caregiver and the policies that need to be considered for that working caregiver. So we've talked about it a little bit in past discussions. I think I mentioned employee benefits EAP program that included discussion about caregiving and encouraged caregivers in the workplace. But I'd like us not to forget that.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to take just a couple of minutes is everybody okay without taking a break? Do you want to take a quick kind of 2-minute stretch break? Or people are shaking their heads no. Okay, just checking. The folks who I can see on camera sort of won that question because I can see people shaking their heads. So, okay, thank you. We'll keep going. All right, so I'm going to share really quickly some of the language slides. I'm not going to walk through all of them. Again, most of this is for reference for you. If you're interested in using it, I certainly have lots more, but we did want to make sure that that we pointed out from our perspective the importance of keeping this or paying attention to the language in the report. So we've captured a couple of quotes and some of the research behind this. I think we're all familiar with that notion that we've really have moved away. When we talk about best practices, we've really moved away from language that implies suffering or affliction or victimhood, if you will. Any language that kind of alienates people. Christy and I had a great conversation over the weekend about, when is it appropriate to use patient? When do we use resident? When do we use person? Sort of deciding and figuring out all of those pieces. It is quite a decision tree in most of those situations, all starting with what does the person wish for us to use if we are talking about a singular person and we have their input. It's also the place where the identity first language really changes up what most of us have been taught for so many years. So you know that we're paying attention to that. I thought that we've talked a lot about the stigma of Alzheimer's disease or a diagnosis of dementia. And I thought that some of the research that we pulled up there that I found there just around the impact of stigma, the fact that it does affect people's willingness to seek treatment, and really the level of shame that it unfortunately creates for folks. And again, that speaks a little bit to the language piece. For us, we want to make sure that our language, I think, Bonnie, this speaks to what you were talking about. Language is accurate and positive, but it's also truthful. Somebody who is suddenly starting fires in trash cans, we need to be clear about that. We also need to understand why that's happening. But trying to sugarcoat that or gloss over that isn't acceptable. It's risky for the person. It's risky for the provider. It's risky for the community. It's risky for the family, and that's obviously not something that we can do. We've talked a lot about the notion of people first language. You've heard us talk about people first language, kind of coming out of the disability community in the 80s. But again, shifting in some cases to the language, to identity first. So there's some information there about that. I thought the Dementia Action Alliance documents were really useful and really helpful. You've got the reference there. So it was a Words Matter document that came out in 2015 and then was updated in 2020. Interesting for me, one of the terms to avoid, PLWD, person living with dementia. I completely agree with that. And yet a few weeks ago, I was participating in a webinar with somebody who lives with a dementia diagnosis, and that was her preferred term. When she writes, she talks about herself as a PLWD. Which to me was just kind of interesting. Again, it demonstrates it's really, really driven by what the person wants us to use, and some more information there. I did not start typing into the slide as you all were talking earlier, so I've added long-term services and supports, long-term care. Bev gave us the link for the definition from ODA of long-term care. Separating long-term care, skilled nursing, assisted living, we will define all of those for purposes of the report. Given the conversation we've had today, information up till now, is there anything that you'd like to add around language that you want us to pay attention to?
Not an addition, but in the first two, could you change or to and?
So it's Alzheimer's disease and other dementias?
Yes, which is what you used in the next to the last bullet there, just included in those two phrases.
Great, thank you. Yep, we'll do that. Anybody else like to add something?
I don't know on the subject of memory care standards, when that is written, if we're talking about units, locked units, secure units, we might want to talk about what would be the right term for those that would be universally acceptable.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's one I've not dived into. Do you know, Bev, is there a preference between locked and secure? They probably could mean different things, actually, as I think about that.
I'm not sure. I hear lots of variety, so yeah. I don't know.
Okay, great. Well, we will see if we can dive into that and find either some commonality, some definition, sort of look to the advocacy folks and see if they have a preferred request around language on that. Thank you.
This is Greg Sini. We're big advocates on using secured. Locked is just an unfriendly term, so I would just use secured.
Yeah, must be frightening.
And that gets us to the other language about positive but truthful. I mean, yes, that's good for marketing, honestly, for a family to hear secure, but the fact is it's locked. And so residents need to understand that they're not going to get off unless somebody gives them a code or a staff member punches in a code. So I think we need to be really clear about what it means.
Thank you. I'll share a link as well if I can pull this up quickly before Yanda wraps up. If you have not had a chance to see, if you're interested, Century Care in Mississippi has a wonderful video. It might be not quite 10 minutes, that talks about their process to go from a locked unit to opening the doors. And it's interviews with staff and families and other people who live in their community. And it's really a wonderful, wonderful story about how they made that change. And I'm sure there are others out there. I happen to have landed on the Century Care because I was having some conversations with the Eden Alternative folks, and that particular community is an Eden community. But I'll share that link if you're interested. It's just a great story.
And you might also think about it in terms of secure could mean more than a lock. So it could be just that there's an enclosed courtyard at one end of the wing, and they can be in all parts of the facility. So that could be secure. Locked is very specific. So, that might be part of a secure unit. But again, because we don't have standards, there's just lack of clarity. That's why we have to call it what it actually is.
That seems to naturally link also to Trey's commentary around looking to who's done this and sort of a mentor state. And I think Representative Creech said this, not starting, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and you can sort of link all of that. Who's done that well? How are they defining it? What are their standards? Lots to consider. All right. Thank you all very much for all of those comments and that feedback and that input. Again, we are incredibly appreciative. Yanda, I am going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about next steps, the 470 report. I think you and Tessie have some comments on that for us, and just updates on what we know so far about the next full task force meeting in person.
So before I do, Greg has his hand up, and I don't know if that's a new comment or just.
Yeah, and I totally missed that. I apologize. Jill just texted me. Thank you. I'm sorry, Greg.
Sorry, that was just left out.
Okay. All right. On the topic of the report, while we understand the existence of that report, the status is unclear, and I think what we can do is acknowledge in this report that it builds on other work that was done and expands upon other work that was done previously, but we don't really have any way to sort of reference back to that specific work or any specific findings or outcomes that came out of that. So, we do know that it was done, but not enough to actually be able to use it. With that, let me just talk for a moment about the 26th. And again, our goal is that, by that date, we will have a summary of findings that will be included in the report to share with this group. Certainly, today's conversation has really been great at grouping these together, at sort of seeing the things that flowed up to the top. Although I do want to note that just because something was only mentioned once doesn't mean it's not important, and doesn't mean that it won't appear in the report. It's just certainly it's helping us see some of the broad groupings that we can, put things under as we go forward with this. And that's, what you will probably see in the report is high level findings, other things that fall under that. But that is still coming together. That meeting location is still to be determined, but that is going to be an in-person meeting. And at least Leanne and I, and possibly Christy and Jill, will be there in person as well. So we're looking forward to actually meeting with you and interacting in person. And it will be a very different look and feel. There is a question I see from Catherine about will there be virtual capability? And our understanding is that no, that now that the COVID-related restrictions have been lifted, the expectation for public meetings in Ohio is that they are in person only. So one must be present in order to be counted as part of the quorum. And to participate in deliberations. My train of thought just literally went off the rails. I got sidetracked by that question. Oh gosh, Leanne, prompt me.
Well, so I think we confirming that we are in person, and I think we don't have a location yet. That's one thing, and the purpose is to vote on the report. Yes. I think the other thing is we are not, as I understood it from the director, we are not able to share the report or the draft ahead of time. So we will be walking in that morning. Handing you the draft. I'll think that through this. There's some meeting process out there that actually comes out of Apple, I think, around giving folks, time at the beginning of a meeting to actually read the documents being presented, because many folks don't have time ahead of time. Lots of different feelings about whether that is useful or effective, but that may be what we need to do is plan the first, 10 or 15 minutes of the meeting to do some overview, and then give you really some focused time to sit and read and make some comments, on a hard copy if you want to do that. We'll think that through a bit, but I think we are not in a position, given the direction from the director, to share it ahead of time. So just so you know that as well.
Pete, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, and I think Leanne said something earlier about Santa lists, and I think I'm going to be on the list for Cole here. But your comments, Yonda, about the House Bill 470 report were very odd, to me at least. And I'll preface this by saying I really don't care because about the report so much, but I thought it was very odd. Does this report exist and we're just being told we can't use it, see it, anything like that, or does it just not exist?
I don't know that it exists in a final form. We have seen a draft. In fact, Bonnie had provided that information earlier, but the actual status of the report as it was actually submitted and or released by ODA and or ODH is unclear to us at this point.
Well, it was never released. That we had many meetings similar to these. Bonnie led them. I remember she lost her little elephant, and that was a very sad day. And then it just stopped, and there was no finality.
Yeah, we have only seen a draft. So and so that's why, because it was not officially released, we can't make sort of any official reference to it. But I think, like I said, it's fair to say that we can acknowledge that there has been previous work in this area. And, product that comes out of this is sort of building on that, that original work.
So Pete, can I just clarify that the work of the group was formally submitted to the Department of Health and the Department of Aging. Their final couple of suggestions that were just a couple of words for the group were incorporated, and based on what was asked by the legislature, it was formally submitted to the Department of Health and the Department of Aging from all of us. What they did with it, I cannot comment.
The other thing that we will know a little bit more about, and again, as I said at the beginning of this meeting, this is the first report, and it really is the preliminary findings of this group, but the work itself will continue. And so we'll know probably not details, but we will start to, between now and the 26th, start to work with ODA, with our internal team on what the process is going to be, really starting in August. While we have, in theory, a little bit more time, in reality, that's still going to be a very compressed time frame to pull together, to extract out recommendations, to extract out everything that comes through any further public comment that we have, and having robust public comment is still a very important component of that second report. So there will be continue to be an active schedule of meetings and public comment sessions through the course of August and September, but it won't be 3 hours every week. That would be a very big ask. So we've got now that we know that everything has to be in person, we're really going to have to work closely with ODA on what that cadence is going to look like, how we get the public comment piece of it in there. But our goal is that we will literally not be walking to the last week of the report being due before actually finalizing that report. This is a very scary place to be right now, as I'm sure many of you can imagine. But that, we should have more information on the 26th. So I don't think I have anything else to add. Unless anybody has any additional comments or questions, I think we can turn it back over to ODA for...
Yonda, can I ask you a question? This is Bonnie. And that is, I know you can't do this today, but prior to the 26th, can you or maybe the chief legal counsel or someone, let us know what voting on this means? So for example, is this to be a consensus document? Must you agree on everything? What if you don't agree on something? I'd really like to know that in advance.
We did have some of that discussion with the director, and I would agree that we want to provide some clear language to you around that. I think there is recognition that not every person on the task force is going to agree with every recommendation that's in there. So we've got to have a way to make, we do hope that because this report is findings, that process, that we may be able to have more of a consensus on the report as a whole versus what may come out of the recommendations report, or the more robust findings. But to your question, yes, you will need clear language and a clear understanding of what the process is going to be, what the role of the task force is in the final report product.
So I guess we would make the assumption then, Yonda, that whatever you decide for this upcoming part of the report will be the exact same for the final report.
I'm not sure I would make that assumption. But we will, I think, between us and ODA, we should be able to give you answers to that by the 26th.
Okay, thank you.
I would think that as the process goes on, as you're trying to develop recommendations based on a certain set of findings, that it's possible that you could revisit those findings.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The mere process of trying to develop recommendations would shine further light on the findings and maybe require some adjustment of them. So I don't think you feel, my personal opinion is you shouldn't be locked in that these are the absolute final findings.
Yeah. Well, and I think we can see from the tenor even of today's discussion, you guys didn't like crosstalk and argue with each other. Broadly speaking, there is agreement on the topics. Now we've got wordsmithing. There are things that will be nuances that we want to make sure are captured. But when you look at the broad high level topics, there is existing a lot of consensus around high level findings. Bonnie, is your hand up new, or is that?
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay, just checking.
And Yonda, this is Leanne. I just wanted to acknowledge Catherine's chat. Really unfortunate not to have the virtual capacity given summer schedules. I think I'm certainly very willing to ask Tessie if there's any additional options and how to elicit task member input if there's not an option there for in-person participation, sort of in addition to the in-person. There's Tessie. Hi.
Hi. Sorry, I'm in my office for the first time ever in this job, so I'm adjusting to my surroundings. So while we cannot deliberate virtually, there's plenty of opportunity for individuals to work with you as you're putting the report together. So if you're sending out pieces and saying, email me back your input, as long as it's not a reply all to the group where we're sharing those discussions, and then you can incorporate those into the report, into the findings, into the drafts, and then reshare. So as long as there's not that discussion occurring where we're having a discussion that leads to a decision that leads to what's in the final report. But one-on-one communication, absolutely. We just need to make sure that we're having those deliberations publicly so that they can know the thought process in them when they're with each other between the task force members. Right?
Tessie, is it fair to say as well that people who may not be able to participate in deliberations at an in-person meeting because they can't attend in person, is there the possibility that they can at least listen to the discussion?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yep. And my intention is, even though we have to be in person, I love virtual meetings as much as you all do, right? Because you don't have to plan the travel to get there. Our intention is to continue live streaming them so that they are available. We just feel like it was a really nice addition to make these public meetings additionally accessible to those that might not be able to show up in person. So I'm working through the technology end of those things. The most challenging part is absolutely doing an in-person plus virtual, but we're working through it. So I think I'm going to have that figured out by the 26th so that we can continue live streaming it. Yonda and team, I don't know that you necessarily need to be here in person because you're not task force members who need to be present and accounted for the voting. So I'm going to look at some virtual options for that as well. So you might be able to join us virtually.
We're actually planning to be there in person because while this is actually, there are some real pros and cons to what we have been able to accomplish through the virtual format has been great. On the other hand, we would lose something if the group was in person and we weren't actually there. We have the opportunity to break into small groups, to foster discussion in some different ways that we couldn't do. And so, no, we will be there. I do want to make one last plug. We did send out to this group, Tessie sent out a copy of the notice for the public comment session. And so we would remind you all as task force members to please make sure that if there are people that you want to make sure have an opportunity to provide comment for this, that you get that notice in their hands. So share that with your networks. We are not as familiar with particular individuals outside of some particular names that have been mentioned through the course of these meetings with who might best participate. So we want to get that out, and it won't be the only opportunity for public comment, but we still are hoping to get as much as we can this week.
Do they have to sign up in advance?
They do, and the notice contains a link where they can go to actually register.
One of the, I think, barriers for family members to participate is the requirement that they submit their comments in writing as well. That might be a challenge for some people, but
yeah. And this particular round is more focused on the professional community. I would agree, Bev, that when we go out for more public, like what I would consider to be true public comment, that would not be a requirement for family members. We want to capture that. We don't want to set up barriers to this process.
Absolutely.
And I have in the chat put a link to the webpage that hosts the Alzheimer's Task Force information. On that webpage, there's information about the forums. If you would like to share it, you can just share that page. So you don't have to worry about attaching the announcement and things like that as well.
All right, I think, Tessie, is it you or Alex that will wrap this up? Because I think we're there.
I'll be glad to. Absolutely. So again, starting tomorrow, we have our public forums. We won't be live streaming those just because they are not a public meeting. Again, they are not a meeting of the task force. So we'll be recording those via Microsoft Teams. I'll then take those recordings and we'll post it to a private YouTube link that we'll then share with the group. So in case you missed it, we'll be sure to let you know how to view those public forums so that you can watch and gain the information that you would like. And then our 26th meeting here in Columbus, we're finalizing spaces. We want to make sure that we do have enough room that we can still spread out. I know that most of us are vaccinated at this point, but we still want to make sure that we're going to be safe. So we're looking for the appropriate space for that as well. So I will get you that information as soon as it's available. Those are all the announcements that I have. Is there anything else that you wanted me to touch on, Yanda, before we call for a motion to adjourn? Oh, Leanne does.
Yeah, Sally's hand is up.
Oh, very good.
I just wanted to, I'm a little concerned, just coming off a holiday week and the short notice of the forums. I wouldn't take the lack of response to that, the lack of interest, just being, in the field. I am buried right now, particularly with the workforce. And I just have some real concerns about people just not having the time to participate. So hopefully there will be some good participation, but if there isn't, I would encourage you to maybe schedule some more with a little bit more advance notice. Yeah. So, with the workforce shortage, I know people are they're just struggling. So,
yeah. Yep.
I just felt I needed to say that. So thanks.
We agree. Thank you.
And we certainly appreciate that. Absolutely. All right. If nothing else, Leanne. Very good. Oh, Pete has a motion to adjourn. May I have a second, please?
I second.
Very good. Thank you, Jean. All right. We will talk to you again possibly tomorrow. We'll see you, if not for certain, on the 26th. Thank you, everyone.
Right.
Thanks, everyone.
See you.
Bye. Okay. Bye.